Hello, I'm Roger Camrass of CIONET, and this is a warm welcome to all those who have just joined us. We are organizing a legal lunchtime session, which we hope will be valuable to all of you who are participating. Firstly, I'd just like to remind you of the house rules. Firstly, if you could rename yourself with your first name and company on your video slide, that would be helpful. I'm sure most of you have used Zoom and know how to do that. But there is a toolbar that will help you and assist you in doing that. Secondly, we would like you to mute during plenary, but unmute as we enter into our discussion groups. We may have a single group today, depends on numbers, or we may break out if there's a large number of participants, and we will lead discussions in those breakouts. If you have any questions to ask, certainly of the plenary panel, please raise your hands or put an entry into the chat group. We will record this meeting for all those who were unable to attend, but this will not be a public record, so you are very much welcome to share all your issues, all your concerns under Chatham House rules. And we would certainly advise you to switch between the speaker's view and the gallery view as the session proceeds, so that you get the best possible viewing of the activities. So again, thank you very much for attending, and I'd certainly now like to just see who is actually attending. Please, if you could just show us the full screen. Excellent. So from participants so far, we have Tony. Yes, Vumi from DLA Piper. What I will like to do is to go around and have you introduce yourselves as people, and Mark, I can see. Perhaps just before the introductions, let me just remind you that our last meeting was actually in late February. We held a dinner at the Bleeding Heart restaurant in London, sponsored by BlackBerry. What was curious there was the number of no-shows. We were really quite disappointed. Only about half the people who were supposed to turn up actually did turn up, but in retrospect, that was not entirely surprising. I don't think any of us at that time had any idea of just what was about to hit us 2 weeks later. A complete and total shutdown of all offices in London and every other city that we can care to name. This was one of those seminal moments, I think, that rather like a 9/11, I don't think we'll ever forget just the power, intensity, and speed at which this hit us and the implications that followed. So clearly today, one of the desires, I think, is to have a really off-the-record chat about how easy or how difficult it has been to affect the transition that we're now going through to entirely distributed working, but equally to look ahead and to say, has this actually changed the way we work? Will we expect to work differently in the future? And what are the lessons that have been learned? So I'm firstly, I'd like, if I might, to ask our guests to introduce themselves. And in doing so, I guess I can, if you can take yourself off mute. Tony, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tony Vitali. I'm Head of Data Protection at JMW Solicitors, and I'm also the firm's Data Protection Officer. So I was involved in the firm's transition to working remotely, including helping out with the new remote working policy that we put together very quickly in order to enable that.
Excellent, thank you very much, Tony. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Parr, I'm CIO at HFW. I'm delighted to see that John's beard is looking as resplendent as mine and is running away with itself. I barely recognised you, John, initially.
Likewise, Mark. A fine show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd been in the role of CIO fast approaching my 9th month, so fairly new to HFW, and I don't think we were at all prepared for where we are currently, but I'm absolutely delighted with how my team and my network is coping. So having the opportunity to come and talk with others and feel some of their angst, but also share some experiences, I think this should be invaluable.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Wumi from DLA Piper, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? So I'm Wumi Olukoya at DLA Piper. I'm a legal project manager, and I suppose this is a very interesting conversation. In February, we were talking about phones and how people are using multiple devices, and I think it's just interesting now where we're all working virtually, so it's going to be an interesting conversation, I suppose. And yeah, I've been a part of the legal tech team at DLA who are rolling out and supporting our restructuring teams, for instance, and some of our other busier teams with virtual working and getting the right legal tech to help them do that properly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I guess you were at the dinner, were you, Wumi?
I was, and it was a very, very interesting conversation we had about devices and cyber security and the need for, I suppose, virtual working, as you might say it. But we did know what was going to come, I suppose, when we had that conversation.
Absolutely. No, it's remarkable how 2 months could actually change the world. So thank you. Is there anyone that I've missed in way of introduction from delegates? I think we've got everyone there. So what I'd like to do now is to actually introduce our sponsors who are going to say a few words about the sort of challenges they're seeing in the field, because I'm sure they've been talking to many different law firms in recent weeks. Many different issues must have emerged during that time. So firstly, let me just make a quick introduction to each of you. Stuart Jackson is joining us from BlackBerry. He's the Senior Director of EMEA as a Solutions Engineer. Andy Grayson, who is the Principal Sales Engineer in BlackBerry, and John Cousins, who I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is UK Head of Legal and Professional Services. So welcome to you, the sponsors. And what I'd like to do now is to have a few minutes with you to talk about some of the really important issues that have reared their heads in just these last couple of weeks. So I guess, firstly, Stuart, if you'd like to tell us how fit for purpose did you see many of the legal infrastructures when they were transformed into home working at the start of the pandemic?
I think the case has been is it's not just been specific to legal. I think it's been pretty much regulation, especially in regulated industries. Anyone who really needs to watch what data they have and what information they're storing and how it's accessed. That's the critical part of this, is actually how information has been accessed and what infrastructures were kind of ready for it. And banking, I think, also had a capability where they were able to work from home and there was more flexibility in the way people could work. Legal was probably more stringent in terms of having to be in an office and had to be confined, if we want to use that word, versus remote. Then there was more control over legal entity and legal entities in general about the data and how that data could actually be used and how it could go externally. So I think there was a number of challenges. It wasn't just about the fact that we had individuals that hadn't worked from home at all. You know, there is this notion of and I've used this a few times recently, is flexi time. And flexi time has been around probably decades now. And the situation is as that concept has kind of come out of this, it's always been born out of this situation, is that we've all gone into a situation where we're saying, okay, day one, you're in an office, that's the way you work. Day two, by the way, you're now completely at home, everything's okay, security is going to be great. And there was an assumption that everything was going to be okay. And I think for a large part, what we've seen is that most people haven't been able to cope. But there are scenarios where people have been struggling to access different devices. Have they been able to get hold of mobile devices, laptop devices? And actually, is that the biggest challenge? Is actually getting hold of the hardware itself. Everyone looks at the biggest things first. They look at the laptops, they look at hardware, desktops, etc. But actually, we also found some issues with two-factor authentication tokens. So people who want to try and access the network with 2FA using RSA or other vendors are available. So we're using those particular capabilities to access the network. They were actually struggling to get hold of those types of devices. So any hardware was considered short of risk. Now, this is going back at the very start, probably the first 2 or 3 weeks, when everyone was in very much a panic mode because everyone was going scrambling, trying to figure out what they were doing. And many people who already had some premise or process of remote working were probably far easier to adapt. That's the general sense that we saw. And obviously, most of our customers, not ironically, is that BlackBerry has always been not just a security company, but a remote working enabling company. That's what we've always done, probably certainly in the last 20 years. So by handing people a phone, we've enabled that capability of accessing data and information outside of a network. So our customers that were already using our products, I think probably found it easier because they had a way of just being able to turn around and say, oh, actually, we've got an extra 1, 10, 100,000 people that we need to spin up, and they could. Or they might have had to adjust some of the infrastructure to cope with the influx, but essentially it was an easier way to spin up. So I think from a term around regulated industries in particular, that's where the struggle was.
Yeah, I'd just love to pick up that point. So did regulation mean that home working was out of the question, or did it mean that home working was an essential part of business continuity?
So again, it comes down to the risk appetite of the individual company. I think there was 2 scenarios. If you wanted people to work from home, they were issued a corporate laptop. Now, that's fine if you can get hold of the laptop. Now, if you can't get hold of the laptop, what do you do then? Or the device that you would work from home. And that's a real challenge. Is that very much in the early days was a massive problem, because you then had to enable or potentially enable devices that you were not under the control of the corporate. And that's where the risk started to come, or became more intense, and became something where people needed to really go, actually, do we allow this at all? Or do we find a way to actually allow that? And that was the challenge.
Sure, thank you. So the second question really is all about the gaps today. So we've had a couple of weeks, everyone's clearly had to find a way of working from home, but where are the significant gaps that are still to be filled?
Yeah, so I think we can't be foolhardy enough to believe that our house security is anywhere near as good as an office security. The scenario is every single time we go to a meeting, we go to a reception, we go and put our names on a list so we know that we're on the fire register, but that's also from a security point of view. We know who's in the building, we know who's in the office, from whenever time in the morning to whatever time in the evening, and they can count that back. And companies have spent millions, if not billions, over decades trying to improve, constantly evolving their security. So the process by which you then disseminate that infrastructure, or that way in which people can access, is ultimately saying, here is the device, go home, you're going to be as secure. That's just a fallacy. That just doesn't exist. So the scenario is that we have to consider what is at home as well. We are in a situation that as soon as you put your device onto a network at home, like this is again something I've been saying a lot recently. The second I put a device onto my home network, I have anywhere between 20 and 25 devices connected to my network, either via Wi-Fi or wired or whatever it is. Now, am I patching every single device within an inch of its life? Of course I'm not. So the scenario is there's a lot more risk just in the network itself that can potentially be a way in to get data. It doesn't necessarily mean the device itself is the thing that you target, but there might be other things on the network which are more vulnerable. And so there are clearly security gaps potentially there, and even on a corporately owned device, there is still risks if you are shutting things down and locking it down. And that then creates another problem, is that if you are starting to lock things down so maniacally, and therefore it becomes really tied down, you're also creating user friction. And what do you reduce? You reduce productivity. And if you reduce productivity, what do you then create? You create shadow IT. And so all the problems that we used to have in an office that we resolved, or we thought we'd resolved, are actually coming back in troves. So we have to be very mindful of that process, is that as we start to chip away at this remote working capability and the security implication of what we're doing, we then have to bear in mind what's also coming down the road. But the best thing is, we've done this before. You know, these types of things have been done before. So it's just a case of learning and adapting this from an office case work into a remote case work.
Stuart,
can I just, sorry, is it possible for me to just jump in as well, if that's okay?
Of course, Andy. I just noticed that we've got a couple of people just joined us, and before we dive further into conversation, it would be really nice just to hear Daniel and Remen to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel Pollock. I'm CIO of DWF.
Fine, thank you very much, Daniel. And Remen?
Hi, I'm Remnal Mohammed. I'm the CIO at Acuity Law.
Excellent. And just to put you both into the picture, we've started with a plenary session. Our sponsor, BlackBerry, is talking firstly about the current transition, which of course has been a massive shock, but hopefully has been now stabilized. And we will then particularly focus on, so what happens next? Where do we go post the post-COVID? Will life change, and in what way will it change? So I think there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion, we hope, amongst you all. But very much welcome to you. And I think if we just go back to the plenary, Andy, you're just about to comment again on the current state, please.
So I was actually going to pick up on something that Mark said earlier, how the fact that he said that they weren't, you said, Mark, you weren't really ready for this, but you're very proud of how your team's coped. I've seen a lot of different standpoints from customers over the last few weeks. Everybody thought they had a remote working solution, and everybody did have a remote working solution, but it was the sheer volume of traffic and the volume of home workers that Stuart also mentioned earlier on. Yes, they did have the position to be able to work from home, but they didn't have the hardware in itself. I mean, not mentioning any names because I don't want to do this, but I know of a financial company that's had to issue Windows 10 home laptops to allow people to connect in via VPN to their core network, which fills me with absolute dread. But and the person who told me fills them with dread about it. But the thing is, we've coped. One thing is we've coped somehow sometimes by going through sort of grey areas and adopting shadow IT. So whilst we're in a nice position here, and I say in the legal secretary in the legal sense, certainly, about 80% of my customers are all happy and coping. I've actually got about 20% of my customers who have coped so well, they're actually looking to now increase services that they're offering during this lockdown because they've been in such a good position. But yeah, I think where we are now is everybody's found a way of working and moving forward, and they're looking at just keeping the lights on, keeping the wolf from the door, as it were, until we get to the end of this lockdown. And I think things will then change. And I don't want to speak anymore, Roger, because I know that we're getting into that area of questioning.
Fine. Thank you very much. So I think probably the most interesting question of all is, after all of this settles down, will it change anything? Will it change everything? Stuart, in your view, are we going to go into a different world post-COVID?
It's $1 million question. The scenario is how do we actually respond to this? And I think the scenario is, if you look at the way that people were working previously, then what they want to do is they want to get themselves into a situation where they were told to work in a particular situation, whether that was compliance or whatever reason they were told to work in that position or in that particular location. They were forced, or they felt like they were forced. And so the scenario that we are starting to see from a number of customers, and it's also backed by certain polls. There was a YouGov poll a few weeks back where they went out, and it was a relatively small sample size, but they asked around 5,000 people, and they said, of those 5,000 people, how many of you want to return to normal? And out of the 5,000 that were queried, only 9% said they wanted to go back to the old normal.
Yep.
So the process there is that you've got 91% of those surveyed that turned around and said, no, I don't want this to return. And the simply, you can look at it internally, you can look at yourself, is at the moment, what am I doing? I'm getting up later in the morning, I'm getting home earlier in the evening as well, so I'm not spending as much time traveling. So therefore, I'm far more productive because I'm not tired just from the travel. If you add an extra hour or 2 hours, if you're lucky enough to live in London and work in London, then that's nice and simple. But if you're traveling either side and you're actually spending time doing that, an hour and a half or 2 hour commute, which is becoming more normal, or was becoming more normal. So the situation is that you've actually got employees now talking to their employers and saying, I don't want to return to that. You know, can we not find a better way to work? Is this not more efficient? However, we have to be cautious about that and also recognize that it's been discussed many times, is about the health implications of working from home permanently. And I felt like that through this period, what we now into the 8th week, is that we have that scenario of feeling cabin fever, the feeling of I need to escape, I need to get out, I need to meet people, I need to speak to people. And there is always the case that selling to people or speaking to people or whatever it is you're doing, you know, we're always selling, regardless of what industry we're in, we're always selling our time, our effort, our service, whatever it is. So the situation is we're always talking to people. So the situation is that it's always harder to establish trust with someone if you never meet them. And so there is going to be these dichotomies that build from this. But I think I'm almost certain we will see people begin to work from home more regularly.
Excellent, thank you very much. Perhaps actually now if we could just get a bit of response from our delegates, because I think we've all raised some very important points. I think firstly, if I could turn to you, Tony, do you still see any gaps having transitioned everyone home? Are you happy with the situation? Are there technical or other challenges that you are currently dealing with? Let's not worry too much about post-COVID, but focus on the here and now.
Yeah, we've had to deal with a few technical issues. I mean, we're fortunate that we use a Citrix system and Mimecast for emails, and that means that we don't actually need any of our staff to have a work laptop in order to be able to access our systems and access their emails and so on. But we are facing with just the infrastructure issues that the country faces with. You know, one of my assistants has recently moved from Sussex to central London, and ironically, her broadband speed has reduced by about 75%.
Wow.
She happens to live in a place in London which doesn't have very good broadband.
Yeah.
And that's actually relatively common. There are pockets, even in the city, that don't have good connections. And as a result of that, she's finding it harder to work from her flat than she is from where she was before. So there are some issues like that. We're finding that there is a difference between our offices. We have an office in Manchester. A lot of the partners in Manchester tended to drive into the office.
Yeah.
For them is actually to continue to do that despite lockdown. And so I've been on various Zoom calls where I've been surprised by the number of people that are actually in the office.
Wow, that's very interesting.
It's patchy. I think that there are some behavioural issues, there are some technical issues, but I think also as well it has to be said that we don't feel like the productivity is as high as it should be, as people are still struggling with maybe having to help out with homeschooling, with there are other issues, and so therefore we might feel a push to get people back into the office, And then, you know, as a firm, we may face some consequences as a result of that.
Very interesting. Excellent, Tony. Mark, any views from your own side, HFW?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that struck me most is the confidence that my clients now have, my customers now have in technology and in IT. Before all this, you know, there was always a sense that IT wasn't good enough, or that IT didn't do what they thought it would do. And actually, what I'm now seeing are people sort of taking control of their own use of the technology. So that's a wonderful thing. But equally, it's thrown some real sort of curveballs at me that you wouldn't expect. So when a colleague in my Shanghai office decides to take a desktop computer home because she doesn't have a computer at home, and it's a box, and she can lift it up off her desk and carry it, so she took that home and thought that would work. Equally, a partner in Singapore who wanted to be able to print at home, so took a 2 by 2 meter MFD from the office and had that installed at home. So it's thrown some really interesting challenges. I think anybody who's got the space to put an MFD in their home lives in a far nicer place than I do, because that would probably fill my lounge. But so that's been interesting. I think absolutely to Stuart's point around the challenge of going. So we term it slightly different at HFW. We talk about the old normal. We talk about this being the new normal. We're talking now about what the next normal looks like. So I almost get a sense that you're going to have a spike of people who are escaping the cabin fever. And blimey, I know I feel like that. I want to get back to work and be able to have a coffee with my chums and talk nonsense and all that sort of stuff. But equally, I've really got used to not commuting in the morning. Now, here's an interesting one. I do miss my evening commute, because actually my evening commute was my moment to take that cassette out. You know, I would leave the office, I'd travel on the DLR, I'd do the standards crossword, I'd get home and I would try and switch off from work. Occasionally, you're not allowed to do that and you would end up having to do something. What I find now, and this ties into that security point that both Andy and Stuart raised, is because my office is in my home and is about 3 steps away from my sofa and about 4 steps away from my kitchen, it means that I'm always available. And actually, I will quite often walk past my laptop at night and go, well, it's still on. I'll lean in, I'll just check my emails. But actually, what I'm doing is counter everything I would tell my colleagues about shutting down your machine, securing your laptop at night, put it in a drawer, put your papers in a drawer, all that sort of stuff. So I think there is a concern around some of that sort of bad security hygiene. But I am excited to see what the new normal looks like and the challenges that raised, albeit, and I'm sure all of my fellow delegates on this will have this, any of those technology projects that I was planning and budgeting for the coming 18 months are all having to move right as I'm being challenged by the business to think about cash flow. And that's going to be a real challenge, because I had some great ideas, and blimey, Andy and John and I sat, we've waxed lyrical about my great view of what I was going to achieve at HFW. That's all now moved right.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a challenge. And I think all the other delegates on this are probably facing a similar view now, is technology projects and the view of where you were going next, that changing. And then the final bit for me is this has absolutely accelerated my thinking around moving to the cloud and what that looks like. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So great confidence in IT, but don't spend any more money. Thank you.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Daniel, would you like to pick up on these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what everyone else has said. Commuting is obviously something that no one misses. I have actually inserted a fake commute into my day. So early on in the crisis, I just fell downstairs, ate a bowl of cornflakes, and then came in here for 15 hours. And my wife said to me, "This is really not good for you." So every morning now, I have my Weetabix actually, and then I go and walk around the block for 20 minutes. And then when I come back into the house, I feel I've got a different mentality, a little bit more metabolism, and I come in here and feel in work mode. I do still find it quite difficult to switch between work me and home me. I think the commute provides you with an opportunity in the day to transition between different facets of your personality and behavior, actually. So I think it's worth looking at. Anyway, yes, at DWF, we're 4,000 people. We're all working from home. It's all fine. We are trying very, very hard not to write any documents that talk about back to the office, return to the office. I've even seen documents called return to work, which seems to me to be a ludicrous way of describing it. We are trying really hard just to think about what next. We're trying very hard not to try to second guess what's going to happen over the next 9 months. So we're trying not to oscillate between one bold but stupid statement that we're never going to work in the office again, and an equally bold and equally stupid statement that as soon as there's a vaccine, we're all going to be back in the office. We're trying not to think about that at all. We're trying to think about evolving what we're doing to the next stage. We're trying to improve the home working experience for people. An experience that was sustainable for a few weeks is just a bit less sustainable. So do we allow people to have 2 screens at home? Do we create a better allowance for peripherals, for example?
Yeah.
I will just pick out one thing that may surprise fellow law firms. We have concluded that we have managed not to print since the middle of March, and we are going to try very hard not to print at all in the future, except where we absolutely have to print. So we're going to try not to maintain paper files. We're going to try to stop people going into the office and saying, I need these 10,000 emails from the middle of March printing, please, and putting on the file. We're going to try to provide a kind of prompt-to-print printing service, which is what we've provided to date, rather than say to people, okay, get back on the MFDs when you're back in the office. So we might, in fact, donate our MFDs to people who want to take them home. Now, that's a joke. We won't do that. But printing costs us a lot of money. Yeah. And the cost of a sheet of paper is not just the click charge. It's the administrator who then files it. And we have, sorry to repeat myself, we have concluded that we have been able to operate without it. So we're going to try to continue operating without it.
So Daniel, does that mean you're going to have to get a lot better digital storage? Because I always think of
a bit. I mean, we've implemented. We were already partway through, luckily, implementing a digital mailroom solution. So all of our incoming paper post, which has dwindled, of course, now just makes its way straight into our case management and document management systems. We are looking at what are we going to do with paper files. What we don't want to do is scan 1 million paper files so that we can make it easy to retrieve 1% of them digitally. That would be absurd. So we're going to try hard not to do very much at all to those paper files. Of course, going forwards, the amount of storage we're going to need will be greater, but not by much. You know, the PDFs exist anyway in mailboxes and so on. So yes, we need to think about that digital storage, but we're mostly going to try to sustain those elements of behaviors which we believe are sustainable and then augment them, rather than trying to create a revolution. The revolution happened in the middle of March for us, and we want to try to hang on to it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Should we talk to Remen at Acuity Law? How has the transition been for yourself and for your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been very good, actually. I mean, we transitioned over to O365 last year, multi-factor authentication, and we have our practice management solution in the cloud. So actually the transition from everybody being in different offices to all working from home was pretty seamless. In fact, actually, it was very, very simple. We had a couple of teething issues, but that was kind of outside of the managed service environment with issues on the network. But apart from that, actually, touch wood, we've had very, very few, if no issues. So I think that transition has been pretty straightforward. I think the biggest sort of feedback, having done team surveys, has not been around technology, but around the human dynamic. And whilst everybody has their own challenges in terms of working from home, in terms of domestic environments, families, children, that sort of stuff, which does interrupt the day. I have 3 kids, and every so often they tend to explode in disagreement, and they're fine 20 minutes later, but typically it's always at the start of a conference call. So I suspect, you know, like everybody else, it's dealing with the human factor. Technology has been absolutely great, but I think what the feedback has been is very much around how teams, even though we use Teams, do feel slightly dislocated from the wider organization. And whilst we do daily team calls and management board calls, every morning shareholders calls, which I'm on, I wear 2 hats as a CIO, but also head of the technology, media, telecoms practice as a lawyer. So I sit in the management group in both hats. But actually what we're seeing is that the view of the board, and certainly the feedback from the staff, is it's all about productivity. It's all about output. We don't really care, or never have cared, about people being chained to a desk. And we look at our sort of utilization of staff, and everything is there. We've seen obviously a downturn in the market, but from a technology point of view, there is no issue between office or home. It's actually allowing people to work to their own individual styles, so actually they can optimize their performance. And I think that is the bit that I think we're focusing more on, because they have that flexibility there. Some people are more than happy to stay at home and work from home. Others can't stand the fact that they're at home and want to get out. And most people are kind of happy with a 50-50 mix. So those are the discussions I think are consuming our time around. If you look at innovation and the way we work, it comes down to people, processes, and technology. I think we've got the technology and the roadmap pretty well nailed. And we've got a few things this year in terms of development. Budgets, has been said, is slightly constrained or deferred. But I think if we can get the sort of people and the focus on the people right, I think the rest follows. So that's very much how we're seeing it.
Excellent. Had you a lot of work to do to persuade your colleagues and partners about the investment in IT? You mentioned that you've gone through quite a...
Well, not at all. I mean, I arrived in the business about 18 months ago, funny enough, and I looked at what was there, and it was Citrix environment, and I just said, look, if we're, as part of the strategy, we're looking to be more mobile, and we've got some issues in terms of interoperability issues with Citrix and a few other solutions, it isn't going to do what we need to do in the next 3 to 5 years. So we've got to take another view, and I think actually this is my plan for what we should be doing. So, you know, we looked at that, we looked at performance of the supplier, the vendor, and we went through a renegotiation of the contract. Investment was made, and one of the things that I'm driving now is our investment group, looking more specifically at sort of innovation investment. So as we drive more around innovation and looking to support innovation in the broad sense of the word, including technology, what sort of budget do we need, and what's going to be deliverable over the next 3, 6, 12 months, but more specifically in terms of our strategic goals over 3 years. So we're working to that plan, but I think it's fair to say that at this point in time, it's about the really fundamental things of any business, but those in a law firm will recognize this. What are we doing around efficiency in the way we work? What are we doing around billing? Because our whole essence is around doing quality work and then getting the invoices out. And what are we doing around collecting the monies that are owed in terms of debtor days? So actually we look at lockup. So all these things are partly underpinned by technology. They're to some extent in the gift of the client. So our ability to communicate and use all sorts of platforms, whether that be a mobile phone, whether that be Teams visual or audio only, or email, to maintain that relationship and contact. So, you know, that stays strong, and the ability to chase on fees remains a fairly simple one, i.e. you haven't paid, you said you'd pay by this date, can you just get it sorted? So I think like every business on this call, our view is around keeping those basic things working and using technology to support that. And I guess to some extent, actually doing some analytics on what it is that we're doing as a business and how we're doing it, and where there are room, where there is room for improvement, we should be putting plans to affect that. And I think that's part of I think we've been busier in lockdown than we have ordinarily. And that's not only kind of wearing my hat as a lawyer, but also as a CIO. I think generally across the business, to maintain the best communication we can with our staff and our clients, there is a huge amount of contact time that you've got to build into the day. And I'm not sure how others are finding their time out of the office in lockdown, whether they're busier now than they were before.
Thank you very much, Raman. Just a little point there, of course, Tony, you mentioned Citrix and the fact that you felt that was a very appropriate environment. Raman has mentioned that he's moved from Citrix to Microsoft 365 Cloud, etc. Any views on that one at all? I don't want to create any tension or arguments, but I'm just intrigued to know why Citrix works well for you and probably didn't work quite so well for Acuity.
I have to say we're planning on moving to Office 365 ourselves. We just haven't quite got there yet, and I think that plan will be accelerated now as a result of the lockdown. But we've not had huge problems with interoperability on Citrix up to date. It's just that we've got some other software we're introducing later this year, which will work better in an Office 365 environment.
Great, no, thank you very much. John, Wumi, have you rebooted? Have you come back to life with your limited broadband?
Yeah, hi, if you can hear me now. So it's interesting, I can't remember who it was who mentioned limited.
Yes, broadband, limited broadband.
I have, and I'm suffering from really bad broadband. I think my IT teams at DLA have been really good, and they sent me a couple of dongle sticks, which still don't work quite as well. I think it's just the area I live in, which I didn't know previously, because obviously I was commuting to work and working from there. But not to take the conversation away from all of the good things, I have been listening in. I don't know if everyone can hear me quite well. I think in terms of my team, so I'm a legal project manager, and I'm so busy now, so much more than I was before lockdown, just because we're finding our clients are having to manage deals virtually now. And whereas previously a lot of the sales work was, as a project manager, you do a lot of sales and there wasn't quite that much pick up of the LPM team. Now it's almost the only option, where you've got a big deal, you're trying to reduce costs as much as possible. There's a lot of pressures both from the client side and our part, the fee earners, the lawyers, to reduce costs. The solutions then go to AI. So how can we actually use deal management platforms? How can we use more efficient resource like the project managers and the LDCs, the legal delivery centers? So basically, how do we use tech to reduce costs is some of the conversations we're having. And back to the conversation about what was it? Was it John who mentioned that about commuting? I'm definitely struggling. Like, I think on Monday I worked till 3 a.m. I think that's absolutely ridiculous for me. But it is just like that, so you start work at 8. I've got my first call at 8:15, for instance, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think previously where we had that, there was a divide, even if you're working late, you're going home afterwards. And now it's just home is work and work is home, and it's just getting that balance. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on things. I think AI is just, DocuSign, for instance. Lawyers are now having to use DocuSign, because that's previously we were doing the sales, use DocuSign, but that wasn't really taken up. But now it's, get us on board, we want to do it, because that's the only way to get your deal through really now. But yeah, interesting days.
Just if I may, again, you say you're so busy. Can you just elaborate again on what extra time is being spent? Where are the bottlenecks here for you that you didn't have when you were in the office?
I think most of the bottlenecks is so things like a deal management platform. It's a lot better created or developed at the start of a project, at the start of a matter. But what you're getting now is you've got multiple matters that are underway already, which now need something like a vRoom or collaboration platform developed scratch, and it's working with the legal tech teams, the normal IT teams to put these things together, whilst the fee-earner is already underway doing the math and completing the deal. So that's some of those, and then you've got like big restructuring matters that are just coming up because obviously clients need these services, I suppose. And it's just a lot more, and my team wasn't that big in itself, so there wasn't that much of a take up on the LPM team before lockdown, and now everyone's saying we need you, but there's just not that many LPMers in the industry.
Oh. Sure, thank you, Wumi. Lee, is it possible for you to unmute yourself and introduce yourself? We've really been covering the here and now. How smooth has the transition been? What are the bottlenecks? What are the things that are already beginning to concern people? What we would like to do shortly is to move on to, post-COVID. Will life be different? Is there a new norm, a next normal, etc.? So please do introduce yourself.
Yes, apologies for the delay. I had a few technical issues to deal with. So my name's Lee Kiln. I'm IT Director at ENW Law, which is a regional law firm based in the UK. For us, we're a Citrix house, so the impact of moving to remote for everybody wasn't significant. It just required us to upscale the remote access system to deal with the number of users rather than just a small number of users would normally work remotely. So we weren't too concerned around that. There's been a few issues relating to the ability for people to print, etc., which has frustrated some of the users, but we've sort of been using it as an opportunity to push them down the electronic route for working rather than printing. So really pushing the paperless and paper-light type scenario. In terms of sort of impact on the business, obviously, it's definitely a different way of working for people, and I think there are significant issues, well, not issues, but concerns around interactions. People, suddenly have been very much used to working in an office environment, communicating freely with everybody and everything else, and then suddenly they're now stuck in for the most part, either the dining room or an old bedroom or whatever, talking to the walls in some respects. So there's been a lot of emphasis for us around people's mental health rather than anything else.
Fine, excellent. So I think actually it does sound as though we want to address this really interesting subject of what happens next, because I guess most of you reach some level of stability. Nothing drastic is going to happen in the next few weeks, but surely people must be thinking rather carefully now, certainly at partner level. Where does this take us? What is the shape of the firm going forward? How important is home working and distributed working, really, because it's so uncharacteristic of legal practices, I guess, in the past. So I'd be really interested, perhaps Daniel, if you could start us off with your views on where next. Is there any signpost yet as to where we're going to go, or is it completely in the wind, in the air?
I personally think it's very unclear what's going to happen next. If you look back at the Spanish flu in 1918-19, I'm sure that everybody was saying nothing's ever going to be the same again after this, and then it went away and life went on. And there've been many plagues and pandemics in human society which have all had an impact, but I bet that they didn't have the impact that people said they would at the height of them happening. So I can only repeat my earlier comment that I don't believe either that we're all just going to be back in the office as soon as there's a vaccine or whatever, and nor do I believe that we're all going to work from home forever. I don't think those things are true. human beings are social creatures,
Yep.
and we all crave that social contact. None of us quite know what form that will take, but I think it would be a fool to try to that tries to predict what's going to happen, which is why we are dealing with what happens next in an incremental way, but trying to take advantage of the things that we've proven to ourselves we can live without. I would like to think that our use of office space becomes one that feels more like a city campus or city hub. If any of you have been in either the Hoxton reception area in one of the two Hoxtons in London, or a Citizen M downstairs, the Citizen M Tower Bridge, they both have the kind of vibe that you could imagine an office having in the future. So we're having a few thoughts in that area. We are very keen as a business to do things differently, sometimes rashly. You know, we floated last year. I'm not saying that was rash, but we floated last year, and we've lived our life in the spotlight since floating. But one of the real benefits of that doing things differently culture is that people are prepared to consider things that, to some of the people on this call, might, I'm not saying, guys, you're behind, I'm not saying that at all, but you may be facing cultures where things that are unthinkable in your environment don't feel so unthinkable for us. It doesn't feel unthinkable to say we're not going to print, for example. So going forwards, I can only emphasize that I am convinced that human beings are social animals, and we are not going to sit looking at our screens forever. We will do something that involves us coming together at some point, whether that's in a year, I don't know. But in the meantime, and when I say the meantime, that's perhaps the wrong way of putting it, but there is a long road between now and where things settle to. Just make one other point. I do think that COVID will accelerate some things that were happening anyway. We've heard DocuSign mentioned. It was already quite a routine thing for us to DocuSign documents within DWF. Now we don't even think twice about it. There's been an acceleration of online courts, for example, through the crisis, although we've seen certain commentators claiming that it's made their predictions come true. I think that's bollocks. There is no doubt that certain things are being accelerated. Lawyers are asking me how I can mark up a PDF, for example, on the screen, when previously, if I tried to persuade them, they wouldn't be interested. I've got far more lawyers saying, you know what, I will give a go. I will give that voice recognition technology a go so I can get my dictation done, and then surprising themselves about how well it has worked. So that's my set of comments. Apology if it's repetitive.
Roger, just a point on that as well. I think what's really noticeable is that we're trying to predict the future, but actually not understanding what's going on in the political environment. So as an example to that, we don't know what the environmental agenda is right now. What we do, or we think we do, we have a target that we need to meet by 2050. We've got the current quarantine that if you fly home, which was set this week, if you fly out of the UK and then back home, you're going to quarantine for 2 weeks. So business travel almost goes to nothing because no one's going to want to risk being at home for 2 weeks. So there is there's a huge environment outside of everything that we potentially think we have control of or think we know about. But there's also the political environment, literally environment, in terms of what we actually do to allow people to work. And do they want to go back to that? Is there something that's going to push a different agenda there as well?
It was that survey you mentioned earlier, Stuart, the YouGov survey. People were saying how more pleased they were with the quality of air and the environment that's around them. So obviously 9% of people want to get back to the way it was, but I think it said something like 20 or 42% of people were pleased by the improvements in the quality of their life out with their house, just in the improvement of the environment. And I think that will drive certain changes as well.
Sure. So Mark, from HFW, your views on where next, and how preoccupied are people in your firm with that question, actually, or are they really heads down on current business?
There's a huge focus on this, not just from how we do our business internally, but also how we meet the challenges of our clients. You know, HFW is a maritime law firm and an aerospace law firm, two of the biggest industries that have had a heck of an impact. And blimey, you know, when you hear stories of there aren't enough airplane chocks available in South America for all the aircraft that are currently parked in airports around the continent, you know, that sort of thing. So it's had a huge impact on us, and that means we've got to think differently, not only about us HFW in our offices around the world, but also how we support our clients, and how we retain that sort of collaboration. And you know, very much the point, it's people, process, and technology, and you can't just look at one element of that. You've got to consider it all. Yeah. And there's a huge focus as well now on how do we safely ensure that for those people who do want to go back in the office, how they can do that and still be productive and not put themselves at risk, and all those good things. So there's a lot of spinning plates around this for us. It's an interesting topic, because as Daniel rightly points out, you know, we're not trying to soothsay. We don't want to try and predict, but we have got to start to think about all these different scenarios, whilst being a profitable firm that reaches its ambition to continue to grow and thrive and succeed. So very, very, very interesting and challenging times. From my perspective, you know, I talk about my customers, my clients being HFWers. For me, it's about ensuring that they have the technology that supports them and continues to support them to work in a way that is different to how they did before. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm seeing a greater level of comfort with technology. I'm also seeing, actually, it's interesting, a thirst for new technology. So blimey, I must have 40 or 50 partners in my business who are far better qualified at technology solutions than I am, because they tell me daily what they think they'd like to see me implement as a tool into the business. They're all also information security specialists, because they're very, very keen to tell you of the the drawbacks of using tools such as Zoom and others, because they've read it in some paper, and that's quite an interesting dynamic. But again, back to that point that Daniel raised with online courts, is we've now got to think we've got a really scattered technology landscape, and we're trying to achieve sort of collaboration and being able to work across all of these platforms. It's understanding how we mesh all that together now in a cohesive way. So, I mean, that's interesting. Courts are working on Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, ubiquitous over a lot of the estate, followed by the meteoric rise of Zoom, and then trying to get all of them to work together and get everybody to be comfortable with just using those platforms is quite a challenge. So my L&D department working at breakneck speeds to push out sort of material around that as well, and that will continue, because, you know, as we rightly say, we're not all going to rush back in the office. We're going to continue to have this sort of blended approach to how we work, and that means people being comfortable wherever they are, working in whichever way they do.
Thank you very much, Mark. I mean, it does raise an interesting question as to how mature those technologies really are. So, I mean, I guess if we'd gone back 10, 15 years, home working would have been really difficult in the way that it isn't today. I think everyone's proven that you can pretty much turn a switch and you can actually be productive at home. But there are new technologies, surely, that are much less mature, but would probably have an even more dramatic effect on the landscape. And I think, again, I think it was Daniel was talking about Spanish flu. You know, I personally, I think telepresence, virtual reality, these sort of things, immersive technologies, which are still way, way early in their development cycle, could be here in 5 or 10 years' time, and could genuinely give you the impression that you could be at two places at once. And I think particularly for international travel, I mean, I've used telepresence myself. It's quite effective, actually, in really operational meetings. rather than Zooms, which are partially effective but not really effective yet. So I'm interested actually in anyone who thinks that there's going to be some serious breakthroughs in this ability to work virtually in a highly distributed way.
I'll have a go at that, Roger. Just quickly, I usually, and this year was no exception, send out an April Fool email to largest groups of people within the organisation that I'm working in. This year, one of the things on my April Fool email was that we were trialling USB handshaking devices that you would plug in and you would be able to shake hands remotely with people. Well, a lot of people said, that's a really good idea. We need that. And now there may be some other slightly dodgy uses of that kind of technology, I imagine, but I would not be at all surprised to see some kinds of tactile remote thing emerging over the next couple of years. There'd definitely be a market. If you could buy one of those for 50 quid, I bet you'd buy a pair. You just would. With regard to telepresence, I've used telepresence a lot. DLA, we don't at TWF have telepresence, but at DLA we put in telepresence worldwide. It costs us an arm and a leg. It is fantastically lifelike, I suppose, and immersive. And sometimes you forget whether you've actually met someone or whether you've met them on telepresence, in my experience. But it's hugely expensive still, and it still requires you to go to a particular setting and have audio, video, lighting, soundproofing, and so on of a particular standard. So I'm not convinced that that's a path that's going to really take off.
Interesting. You're absolutely right. It was, probably still is, very expensive. I guess that whole cost equation has to change dramatically in the years to come. You'll probably be able to fill whole walls with image screens, and you will have all the sort of capabilities embedded in a regular PC. So I'm a real optimist there. I think this is actually really going to happen big time. Probably 5 years, but not yet, clearly. Tony, again, your views on what happens next. Is this a topic of conversation for you all?
Yeah, I think what we're now discussing internally is whether, when we have the ability to go back to work, what the right mix is of people, and whether we should encourage people to spend a certain proportion of their time in the office and a certain proportion of their time working remotely. We're based in 2 or 3 large cities which don't yet have the transport infrastructure to make it possible for even 25% of our workforce to go back to work. But that, I assume, that will change. And when it does, it gives us a choice and an option which we didn't have before. And so we are talking about what the right mix is and whether that's going to have a boost to productivity and a boost to revenue, just having people in the office. We're largely open plan, which, sell or sold to our staff on the basis that it makes collaboration easier and natural. And I know, for example, there are some partners who, when they see a more junior member of staff, a paralegal or a trainee or somebody at that level, sitting there with headphones on, they used to say to them, it's probably not a good idea that you isolate yourselves, because if you take your headphones off, you'll pick up lots of really positive things just by hearing and listening to the people around you. Well, we just don't have that ability now. I don't think we're going to get it through working remotely. I think the only way you can actually absorb what's going on about you is to be in the same room. And so we need to find the right mix of making that possible in a safe way. Because I think there are some real benefits of just being in the same place. And, as someone else said, we are social animals.
Yeah.
We will benefit from from doing that. But I do think that going forward, it will be a choice to be made about how much you spend time in a work environment in the same room as your colleagues and how much you spend working remotely. That choice has never really been provided to lots and lots of lawyers in the past, and now there's a real opportunity to do it. It'd be interesting to see what models work and what models don't.
Sure. Renan, your views here on what happens next, if you would.
I mean, I think it's going to be pretty similar, and as I alluded to earlier on, I mean, we are, and I think any business is having exactly the same conversations. But I think it's an interesting one around trying to determine to what extent will we ever be eradicated from COVID or whatever takes its place with flu. So you know, we're in a situation that we have to constantly adapt. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. But what I do think it has brought into focus, certainly for our business, is actually if we're focusing on productivity and people have choice and they're able to determine for their own working patterns within their team and the wider business how they wish to work with that choice, then that is an opportunity that to date has not been tested right across the business in terms of the junior level. I personally have always worked in an environment having had an international role or roles that actually, you know, if you're pretty used to, and the teams around you are pretty used to being flexible and work even from a taxi to a hotel room to the office desk, it's not actually a big issue. But when you're talking to junior members of staff who you're able to say, look, I'm really not concerned whether your bum is on a seat in the office or at home, but provided you're delivering all the things that's expected of you, crack on. And I think some cultures have not allowed that to happen for historical reasons or technical reasons. But I think now what we have is an ability for staff members to be agnostic in terms of where they work. But I think coming back to Tony's point and to some extent Daniel's point, you know, at the end of the day, we are not robots. So actually you can create environments for people, but ultimately success will come from actually the way people interact, and you have the multiplier effect not only within sort of staff environments, but also with clients. So there is a limit to what you can do remotely. There is a limit to productivity, I think, remotely. But actually when you can couple flexibility of working together with the right tools to do the job and the ability to collaborate, I think you then create the right platform to drive business forward. And frankly, as we start to enter into recession, anything that can help overcome that at a business micro level or a macro level in terms of the UK has got to be a good thing. But can we foresee how that will be? I think that's quite tricky. I think it's a $6 million question that we're all trying to answer.
So again, actually, I worked with some architects some while back looking at functionality of space. And they came up with actually rather an interesting observation that we use space in three ways. They described it as heads up, heads down, or heads together. Heads up means I'm with a client. I need space physically to meet a client, talk about problems, issues, etc. Heads together, I'm with a team. I'm probably with an internal team trying to solve a problem, get to some solutions. And heads down means I'm just doing desk work. I've got to have quiet. I've got to concentrate. And I think there's something quite fundamental about that, that 2 out of the 3 functions of space is to provide physical collaboration, either with a client or an internal team, but a third is about heads down. And I'm just wondering whether people can segment their work patterns so that perhaps one could use your home as the work heads down, heads together, but use the office as the heads up.
I mean, I think for us very much, I mean, that resonates because one of the things that we've been talking about, well, how do we use the space now? And I think that's actually a really good way to look at it in terms of, well, we would have put it down to, well, you know, there will be situations where you can't just do the client meetings remotely because it just won't have the same effect or benefit. So the heads up is important. So there's a tip there. Collaboration both internally and with clients, you still need the fact that you need to have some physical space. So our view is, well, if we are giving people the choice on the heads down piece, the true working and need to work in isolation to an extent with the ability to reach out to the teams, the wider teams, but that delivers the best outcome in terms of what they're doing, then actually we have to redefine the spaces that we've got in the offices, and raises the questions, to what extent do we need the extent of the space that we have? And I think we are very much, I like that, and I will use the heads up, heads down in collaboration, because that kind of defines our discussions around, well, how do we work in a slightly more hub environment, and do we create hubs that actually become shared space with clients, in terms of spaces where some clients, say some very big clients, FTSE 30, FTSE 100 clients, are actually looking to do away with some of their central London space. So the view then is, well, actually, if we create collaboration spaces within our offices, then we create an environment where actually not only do we maintain the relationship with our clients, but we're actually providing benefit for them. I mean, a lot of firms do that anyway, but I think it's the heads up definitely, and the team collaborations that are things that you can't do away with.
Just on that one, I was actually a partner at EY during the 9/11 disaster, and one of our biggest clients was American Express. The major building in New York was hit hard, and we basically said, move in with us. And we had American Express living with us in New York for years. And it is interesting as to how this might shake out in terms of the relationship between yourselves and your clients, and where the physical boundaries actually start and stop, whether they're less solid in the future, more flexible. So I'm just looking, Lee, I'd really like your input, if we could, on this whole issue of where next.
So from what we're planning at the moment, and to be fair, it sounds like we're all sort of on some tracks at the moment, if I'm honest. We are considering moving to a rota-based system is one option that we've thought about. So we have a rota in place to determine who's in the office and when, etc. We anticipate that there will be almost 50-50 split from people working from home and in the office during the week, so 2 or 3 days a week. I think the interesting thing for me, and I think it's Mark that mentioned it as well, is what I've seen since the COVID-19 outbreak is, prior to the COVID-19, is there was very much reluctance to adopt new technologies. And actually, the one thing that COVID-19 has really brought about is, within our business, is we've really pushed forward with bringing in new technologies. And the adoption of change within the legal side of the business has been brilliant in many respects. It's always been an issue for us in the past. So I think there's still there's a lot of unknowns in terms of what the future looks like, not just from what we're being told by the government, etc., but also in terms of for businesses generally. But what we're literally just trying to do is take one day at a time, try and plan for that, try and come up with suggestions and solutions on how that will work for the businesses, for the users, in the business. We are engaging with the users as well to try and obviously determine what will work for them and actually what they would prefer to see as well.
That's very encouraging what you've just said about the adoption of technology, because clearly legal practices tend to be conservative, partners tend to be conservative by and large, as they do in all professional service organizations. So I think in a sense there was a pent-up frustration actually in the way things were worked in the past. This has opened the door really for some new options, new alternatives, which I think would be beneficial, providing, as you say, people are willing to accept change. And
Roger, can I actually ask a question of everybody? You don't have to answer it, but I'm interested in whether anyone's got reflections on our mad idea to stop printing.
Yes, I love that one. That's great. Could I just...
We agree with that actually, and actually what's been really interesting is I think there's only been 2 instances of people who've asked permission to go into print. The only heavy users of printing are very much our litigation team, but everything we do is very much around the e-filing. So the encouragement is everybody should e-file. and by exception, we need to understand why they're not filing.
We're exactly the same as well. We've actually disabled home printing completely within our Citrix environment, apart from a subset of users. And
just
generally speaking,
forwarding it all to their home email addresses, Lee.
Yeah,
no, they're not, because we have technologies in place which tells them not to. So it scares the bejesus out of them, because it pops up a little box saying, "Are you really sure you want to do this? Because we are watching."
Yes, is the answer.
Because I need
they
it
won't
done.
admit it. No, blimey, I'd love to say we weren't going to print, and I was hugely appalled when I arrived in post to find the amount of home printers that we were paying for, the amount of home printers that came out of the IT budget. So exactly to that point, people emailing to their home address to be able to print off. And I mean, the lack of sort of awareness of the cybersecurity issues around that alone is petrifying. So I think it's a great idea. I think the thing I've struggled with most is getting people to use this idea that you can mark up documents electronically.
Do you think? Sorry, I was going to say, do you think that's also a transition that we're starting to see? I mean, I think, we look at sort of, and I shouldn't say generationally, particularly with the millennials, and sort of, I used to have this conversation with my trainees regularly around, well, what would you rather do, mark up on a piece of paper on the screen? And you had such a spread between the partners who always wanted to mark up physically on paper and pen, to the juniors who would always say, no, I'll do on screen. And I think there is a generation, but also a cultural divide, and it's about familiarity.
I agree. No, I absolutely agree. And whilst many have adopted some new processes now, my worry is this won't solve a lot of that issue. That actually what we'll see is reversion back to, well, I used to always print off in the office and I want to print off again. And that's my fear now, is that whilst we've seen some people change and adopt, that you might see that sort of muscle memory flex back to how we were.
Just make it hard for them to print. They have to go through so many processes.
Well, yeah, but you missed it. You missed at the start. Remember, I've partners taking MFDs home. So if I send all the MFDs to their home and make it really, that maybe they'll soon change their mind. I don't know. It's a really difficult one. I think it's a very brave move. I think it's where we'll all go. I'll be stunned to see, we talk about green law, and there's lots of chat around how that becomes a differentiator for law firms. I think we've got to be able to demonstrate something. Certainly, if I look at my Australia practice, they've made a huge inroads into becoming paper-free. If I look at my London office, quite a bit different.
We're actually hoping with our printers to actually, given that obviously it is now working remotely and in many respects electronically, we're actually hoping to reduce the number of MFDs in our business to 1 per floor.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. And I think if we carry on as we are, we can probably achieve that in the next 12 months, which will probably scare the bejesus out of the users, but that's absolutely fine.
It'll probably scare the bejesus out of Ricoh and Xerox. They must be terrified for their business models.
Yeah,
absolutely, yes.
We all talked about the paperless office. Where did it ever go? So just 2 little points. One is that we will have either texted or emailed you a simple question: who is the most valuable contributor today? Because we're going to give them a prize, and we'd like you all as delegates to just fill in the form and respond. We'll process it very quickly. But while we're doing it, firstly, so many thanks to you all for sparing precious time to come on board and talk and share, because I've just learned so much myself. I hope you have learned too. And I'd like our sponsors, particularly Stuart, to please, Daniel. Yes.
We all love to make relationships. So I've met people today who I'd love to bounce ideas off. Is there a way that we can all consent to our email addresses being shared?
I'm more than happy for people to get in touch. Be delighted.
Same here.
Great.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah, fine with me too.
Excellent. As I've always said, these meetings are all about networking, sharing ideas, hopefully accelerating progress, because there's someone here today who's cracked pretty much every problem that we're confronted with. So why keep it a secret? It should not be a secret. So I'd just like to call again on Stuart if you could take the lead and just try and summarize what you've heard and how BlackBerry itself contribute to your own thinking.
And I think, you know, I've written down at least two, 3 pages of notes here just to kind of go through and understand exactly where the thought process is. And actually what we come down to is we come down to very similar scenarios, is that most people don't want to return to how as it was. But actually we need to be productive and we need to remove friction is pretty much the kind of the concept of what we described. But we also want to make things secure, obviously, but we also make things as easy as possible wherever possible. And so from our point of view, that's kind of the future state of what we're also now investing a lot of our R&D dollars into, is really looking at how we remove friction. Because the biggest challenge you have is to adopting any new technology. And the irony in itself is a technology such as reducing friction is a new technology. So the scenario is you can't implement something without adopting it. So the scenario is what we're now looking at is we're now starting to look across not just authentication in particular. You know, people levy the fact that BlackBerry is now becoming a cybersecurity company. Well, the irony is that we've always been a cybersecurity company. We've always looked at how we can move data from one point to another. Now, obviously with data protection and various other things that we want to also be concerned with is how do we actually make sure that data, especially in a paperless world, is how do we actually make sure that that data is marked correctly? Because that's always been a challenge, you know, for any industry, regardless of whether it's legal or outside of that, is how do you take a document, you recognize it, and then you say, okay, that document is definitely confidential or it's definitely public. There might be even small parts of it which may vary and sit within different fields. So the things that we are looking for in the near-term future this year is around removing friction. We want the ability to be able to say to people, you continue doing what you're doing, and the only time we will stop you is when we recognize it's not you. So the idea is I start to consume, I start to use my laptop, my desktop, my device, whatever it is, and it's learning that it's you. So the way you stand, the way you walk, the way you talk, the way it interacts, how fast I type, those types of user behavior analysis. I don't want to use that because that's not really what we're doing, because there's many facets to it. But ultimately what we're trying to do is trying to remove that friction, trying to allow people to work in the way that they want to be as productive. So this kind of falls in line really with the flexibility that we've all discussed today. But then actually, as we move through that, we're also starting to look at more intelligent ways of using data, how we can interact with a piece of data, how we can interact in ourselves to be, if I continue to be me and my product or our devices have learned that, and then I start to consume a piece of data, we can also look at that data and say, well, is this in context of the way that is used or should be being used? I.e., am I sending that as an email and then suddenly a person at the other end is suddenly downloading that email and sending it externally, and is that right? Or even sending it to a printer, dare I say. So there are many ways in which we are starting to look at how we interact. And one of the critical parts of this, Office 365 has been mentioned a few times, and Citrix as well, is that these are processes we're starting to work with. You know, I think the past BlackBerry was very much around, this is our way and no way. That, if we go back into the darkest depths of the handset business, that's very much how BlackBerry was. Here is a handset of BlackBerry. You can come onto our platform and we can't do anything with it. You know, you want WhatsApp? No, we're not doing that. It was that scenario we ended up with, and actually was one of the biggest problems in the past was with BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, was the fact that that sat within a BlackBerry environment, but we didn't want it on Apple and Android because it would cannibalize our business. Well, there we go. You know, the history is already written. So the situation is that as we go forward, we want to then collaborate more. We actually want to be able to work with these different systems. You know, iManage is a classic one, the ability to be able to archive and case or use case management in that process. I receive an email, I send it to iManage. So that's an example of what I'm describing, but also opening that out into DLP capabilities, and then opening it up and being able to say, well, here is a document and it can prove that it's me before I've even accessed it. So it then sends a note to whatever system in the back end in Office 365 situations where we're predetermining the user to say, by the way, I trust this user, and therefore you're allowed to access that data because I trust this user and you trust me. and trying to do all of that process seamlessly. And that's really where we're trying to head towards as a company. So everything we kind of described, ease of use, simplicity, productivity, all of those key points is really where BlackBerry is going with its security, and that's how it's kind of overlaying it.
So almost hyper-personalization is really what you're talking about there.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's kind of it's interesting actually. So some of you may know that we acquired a company called Silence just over a year ago now, and that was about $1.4 billion investment. So it was a large research investment. What is it we actually bought? We were buying the knowledge, we were buying the data, the analytics that they built. And so what we were doing, ironically, it was a year before that, is we were working on a system which was looking at analyzing information and data in a neural net way, which actually operates in many dimensions and is able to stipulate and say, okay, well, I see how you're holding a device. I see the height through accelerometer. I see the GPS coordinate. I see all these different feeds of information. And based on that, I can give you a score. And I can say, I reckon, well, I don't reckon, I know that you are either 0, I don't trust you at all, or I trust you implicitly and you have 5. And that you come in between that boundary and you can restrict the level of access based upon that. Now, that on its own in isolation is okay, but when you start to actually build that out into other systems, then you start to build almost like a mesh or a way in which you can have aggregated scores coming from different systems. And the more and more aggregated systems that make up that number, you actually end up with more certainty of that individual is doing namely the right thing, but is also doing it in the way that they should be doing it in context. So continuous auth is one thing, being able to constantly monitor and look at an individual to see if it's still them, but also a contextual. So if I'm on my mobile device and my laptop I log into, it wants to check back with the laptop or the mobile device to say, is this still you? So it's about that ease of use. It's about the fact that I just continue to be me. I never even get requested for what we would term formal authentication, whether that's multi-factor or password. It gets away from that and it simplifies the process. That's kind of the future. And some of that is reality today and some of that is coming later this year.
Excellent, Stuart. Thank you very much. But actually, I just would like to call on, I think, John Cousins, because you, I'm sure, know all these people and you know the legal world extremely well. What are your reflections on the discussions today, and where do we go tomorrow? John, over to yourself. You're on mute still.
Yeah, I should be off. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, absolutely.
Yeah, great. So I think it's been a fantastic discussion, really interesting. It's clear that one size doesn't fit all, though. I think clearly there are some, everybody's from a legal background, so there will be some clear synergy, some alignments, but clearly the whole, to pick up on the people, process and technology analogy, I think moving forward, everyone has to find what works best for them. Interestingly, we've had some additional feedback that haven't heard about today from some firms that are telling us they are actively looking at reviewing the requirement for commercial property space moving forward, because they can see the potential here, because the technology is far more of an enabler than they realized. A lot of people are liking and enjoying working from home. It's not impacting productivity. So downsizing commercial property, I think, is something that will be under review moving forward, for example. The other aspect is alignment with BCP and disaster recovery. So we've also had a lot of firms talking to us about that. And how they're looking at plugging the gaps that have emerged from the current lockdown situation. But no, I mean, overall, it's been fabulous. It's been very interesting. There's lots of ideas and also clearly moving forward, it's not straightforward for everyone. So I think it'll be challenging as well, but very interesting times. And yeah, just like to thank everybody for joining. It's been great.
Thank you. Over to you, Sean. Can you make an announcement? I think we are just over time, so if there's any...
Just very quickly, we've just in the chat at the bottom, we've just shared the link. It literally takes 10 seconds to complete, and that's been shared with all, as well as in private messaging as well. So if we can just take a couple more seconds to do that. I'd like to just, in the meantime, we're still waiting on one more to complete, but in the meantime, you mentioned about sharing emails. We are looking to have this as a regular occurrence for absolutely everybody in the legal community that's interested in knowledge sharing. But we're happy to share details as well, as you mentioned earlier. Also on our CIONET app, we will be providing a secure space for knowledge sharing. So it's open to all CIOs, but we'll also provide a link to the group as well, where we have surveys, sounding boards, etc. like that as well. So we'll be providing that to all post-event, as well as any feedback on timings, what works for you, the time of day, etc. like that as well. Yeah, so I'm just going to double check with our colleague if we've got the last feedback in.
Well, we're just poised for this enormously important result. I'd just like to say, I think the way that this virus has hit us at the time that it's hit us is actually really quite profound, because I think that technologically as a society, we're well advanced actually to be able to function quite effectively in this new world. I don't think we're suddenly going to rush back to where we were a year or two ago. And to use, I think it was William Hague who said, we're going to see 20 years of change compressed down to 12 months. I actually agree with him. I think the digital world has been slow and gradual. It's been creeping up on us. And of course, you've got the big leaders who are so visible. But for most people, it hasn't made a lot of difference. I think this is actually the bigger trigger point. It is going to make a difference. So actually, there's a seminar coming up on London 2040, and it's really interesting to think ahead as to what the role of big cities will be, and what will we be doing in big cities in 20 years' time. I think this pandemic is actually going to accelerate a societal change, ways of working, ways of socializing, a whole range of things are going to happen. So in many ways, as a technologist, I'm really quite excited. I'm quite optimistic. I think the next months and perhaps next 2 or 3 years are going to be very painful, very tough. But after that, I think we've got a very optimistic landscape opening up to us. So how are we doing, Sean?
Yeah, great. And thank you for everyone for completing. It's not just voting for MVP, which obviously comes with a charitable donation. It's improving the quality. And as I say, if we're going to be providing this service going forward for our legal members, then great. The most valuable participant is actually a tie, and it's between Mark and Daniel. So all we would require from you guys is announce it now. We'll write to you afterwards. What charity you'd like us to donate on your behalf, so separate charitable donations. In the meantime as well, and as we've highlighted throughout the campaign, as we're not paying for venues immediately, a charitable donation of £100 each for every member joining the group goes immediately to Meals for the NHS as well. So you can obviously top that up, or you can provide it to a charity of your choice, because obviously charities are very much suffering like many businesses are at the moment as well. So big congratulations to Mark and Daniel.
Excellent. So again, many thanks to all, particularly to the sponsors who've encouraged us to bring this forum together, and obviously to yourselves for all the intelligent information that we've shared together. So hope we'll see you again, and hope that the next few weeks and months will be more stable and more productive than the last couple of months. Thank you very much.
For the last 15 years, I've been on a quest to discover the DNA of the most successful digital leaders in the world. What makes them tick, what's in their minds and in their hearts. We are sharing deep insights from our world-class CIOs so that you get inspired, can learn and reach your full potential as a digital leader. If you are an ambitious technology executive, then I invite you to join CIONET. Join our community so that you too can realize your ambition.